Hey guys, today we are in Revelations chapter 21. So we left off yesterday with the great white throne judgment, and today we get to see the new heaven and the new earth. Before we get into it, I just want to point out how precise and detail of this chapter is compared to any other chapter in Revelation. There's a lot of detail, very exact detail, which shows us a couple things. One, God wanted John, and through John, us as Christians, to know the end, and the end is good. Two, that it is already created. The new heaven, the new heaven, the new earth, all of that is already created and is waiting on God's timing, right? So there's a lot to be said here. But I'll try to keep it brief. Then, verse 1, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. Now, if you know your Old Testament well, especially the book of Isaiah, and Isaiah in chapter 65, verse 17, and chapter 66, verse 22, we see these words, a new heaven and a new earth. So as Old Testament readers read this instantly connects dots for them. Okay, a new heaven and a new earth. This goes back and ties it into that prophecy in 65 and 66 in the book of Isaiah, right? So remember what we said from the beginning. You've got to know the Old Testament to understand the New Testament, and especially the book of Revelation. Then I saw the new heaven and the new earth, and for the first heaven and the first earth has passed away. Notice that the earth that we're living in now, and the sky and the atmosphere, that is all going to be passed away. It's going to be judged, just as the world and those who did not believe were judged. So will the earth, right? In the beginning, God created the earth and it was good, and He created it for Adam and Eve to be in relationship with Him. But as they chose to sin, a part of that curse was on the earth. And so from Genesis chapter 3, the earth is getting worse and worse and worse and worse, allowing more sin and allowing more consequences of sin to fill and permeate the earth. So just as God had to get rid of those who were sinful and did not have the righteousness of Jesus on them, He had to exclude them, put them um, into the lake of fire. So too goes the earth, right? And so, because it is full of sin and the consequences of sin. So, because of that, He has to bring on a new creation, right? A new Garden of Eden, if you will, a new beginnings for those who believe in Jesus and those who are without sin because of the righteousness of Jesus, right? So, we have to have something as good and as holy as Jesus and God is. So He's going to create this new heaven and new earth, and the old ones are going to pass away. And notice this, the sea was no more. The final heaven, right? The new earth and the new heaven, there will be no water. We will read later on of a river, but the river will not run water, it'll run eternal life. And so that just tells you on our bodies, when we're on heaven, we have spiritual resurrected bodies. We will not have the demands of a water-based life that we have now on earth. And so we don't need water, right? There's no need for it. So we will not have that. The sea will be no more. And then I saw the holy city, a new Jerusalem. New Jerusalem is not the heaven per se, it is the capital of heaven, right? So heaven is bigger. Just this new capital city, this new city is Jerusalem. New Jerusalem is the capital coming down out of heaven from God. So notice that it's already been created, it's there, and it's coming out of heaven and is going to be the new heaven. And so just tells you how much that God loves us and already has everything that is perfect created for us, just waiting upon his time. And this new city coming down will be prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. So, just like in a wedding, it's coming down, it's going to be beautiful, it's going to be glorious. And so that's kind of the vibe that it's giving. And when I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they with him." Now, we've talked about this word before, dwelling place. It's the Greek word skanu or skene, depending on how you use it. Um, but skanu means a dwelling place. It means to inhabit, to be there. And so here he's saying that this, behold, the dwelling place of God is with men. There is no temple in heaven. In the new heaven, there is no temple. God in Jesus will be dwelling with everyone. He will dwell with them and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. There is no temple, there is no special place that God is. God will be everywhere. He will be with all of his believers. And so it gives us kind of a vibe of reading back to Genesis chapter 2, right? He would walk with them, Genesis chapter 3, in the cool of the day. God was with them, he's dwelling with them. And that's what the new heaven and new earth will be. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. There'll be no mourning, no crying, nor pain, for the former things have passed away. So we see what is not in heaven, right? There's going to be no sadness, no grief, no sorrow, no stress, no sickness, no pain, no death. There will be none of that. This will be a perfect place without curse, the curse of Genesis chapter 3, and without the consequences of sin. So this heaven will be something that ultimately we can't even fathom. We just hope for. Verse 5, and he who is seated on the throne said, "Behold, I am making all things new." He is a creator, that's God, and he is creating all things new. And he also said, "Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true." We've seen these words before, trustworthy and true. Um, Jesus was called, right? The faithful and the trustworthy. So he says, write these down. These words are as good as God. That's really ultimately what it is saying, that these words are as good or as faithful or as trustworthy and true as I am. And he said to me, "It is done." Now, if that doesn't echo John chapter 19, verse 30, where Jesus is on the cross and says, "It is finished," it is very much the same word. It's not the exact same, but it's very much the same, saying what he has done is ultimately brought to completion. Not just the creation of heaven, because like I said, it's already been created. It's just waiting on his time. But the ultimate fulfillment of his will, of his salvation, of everything that he's doing, right? From the moment of Genesis chapter 3, where he curses them out of the garden, God has been redeeming and chasing and getting people back. And now it is done. It is brought to completion. I am the first, the Alpha. I am the Omega. I am the last. I am the beginning of history, and I am the end of history, right? Once again, little resume of God of who he is. Now we're going to get two things of who, this two descriptions of who is in heaven, right? So you want to say, hey, what does it take to be in heaven? You're going to get two descriptors right here. To the thirsty, I will give from the spring of the water of life without payment. So one thing that the citizens of heaven are, they are thirsty. It does not mean that they are literally thirsty for water. I told you they won't need water, but they are thirsty for God. This is reminiscent of the Sermon on the Mount, right? Where Jesus says, those who have hunger and thirst, blessed are those who hunger and thirst after my righteousness. So those who are thirsty for the righteousness of God, and I will give you the water of life. This doesn't bring back John chapter 4, sitting down with the Samaritan woman. And then verse 7, so you must be thirsty for righteousness. And number 7, the one who conquers will have this heritage, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. the one who conquers. It doesn't mean that we conquer really anything. It's those who believe in the one who conquers. The citizens of heaven will believe in the one who ultimately conquers all things, including death, and that is Jesus Christ. And so we must be thirsty for righteousness, and we must be believe in Christ who conquered everything. And this will be his heritage. This will be his inheritance. And I will be his God, and he will be my son. Those who are in heaven will be co-heirs with Jesus in heaven. But now we see in verse 8, who will not be in heaven. For as the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable, murderers, sexual moralers, sorcerers, idolaters, all liars, their portion will be in the lake of that lake that burns with fire and sulfur, the lake of fire, the eternal hell. Right. So we can see the difference. One who hungers and thirsts for God, one who believes in God, that Jesus is the conqueror, or those who will not be in heaven is everybody who does things their own selves. Why is somebody cowardly? Because they don't believe in a God who is stronger. Why is somebody faithless? Because they depend on themselves. Why are they detestable? It's because they don't know the word of God. Why is somebody a murderer? Because they want themselves to have or to be number one in their life. Why is somebody sexually immoral? They only care about what their flesh wants. Why is somebody a sorcerer, or somebody who is into wickedness, because they only care about themselves? Idolaters. They want to worship only what they create and they make. People who are liars are people who try to um, preservate themselves, right? So we can see here the difference of who's in heaven: a person who is for God, or a person who is for themselves. And that's the ultimate kind of line of who is in heaven. Verse 9, then came one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls full of the seven last plagues and spoke to me. So here, one of the angels from the seven bowls of wrath came out, and he says, come, I will show you the bride. Remember, the bride is New Jerusalem, right? We saw that in a few verses past. It will come down like a bride. I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. Now, you would say, wait a minute, I thought the wife of the Lamb is the church, right? That's what we learned in chapter 19, right? 18 and 19. You're right. But why do we name things the things that we name them? It's because of what is contained in them. So the Jerusalem is coming like a bride because Jerusalem contains the bride of Christ, which are all the saved people. So he says here, let me show you Jerusalem, right, which does contain all of the same people, all the saved people. And the wife of the Lamb. And he carried me away in the spirit to a great high mountain. Remember, John was on the Isle of Patmos. I know it's hard to believe. It was a couple weeks ago, right? But he's on an island of Patmos. And here we can see that this is not some spiritual revelation. This is not some vision. This is a reality, if you will, some kind of way that God literally took him from that Isle of Patmos and brought him up and saw this. We get the same language from Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 12 when he says he called me up to the third heaven. And so we don't understand exactly what happened and what this looked like, but this was in a real sense, right? Not just a vision. And he showed me the holy city of Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God, having the glory of God, its radiance like the most rare jewel. Notice this, it's radiance, it's radiating the glory of God like jasper, clear as crystal. Now, for you ladies who know your jewelry, you would say, jasper? It's a stone. You can go to you can go to the Yelverson's Jewelers and get you a beautiful jasper pendant or ring. But you would think it's not what I would think. Jasper today is not the jasper of the Bible. So when they say jasper, in our minds, think diamond. Okay, it's the best way to describe it. It's not a diamond, but it's very diamond-like. It looks more like a diamond. So if you know your jewelry, don't think today's jasper, think more of like a diamond. And so that just means it's very faceted, it's shiny, you can see through it, it's bright, it's brilliant. That's what it is. He had a great high wall with 12 gates at the gates 12 angels, and on the gates of the names of the 12 tribes of the son of Israel were inscribed. Notice this. This is a real place with real dimensions, with real walls, with real gates. This is not just a spiritual cloud that people are floating on and it's just like kumbaya, right? This is a real place, right? This is giving definition to say this is what God has made, this is where God is, this is what God has done for us. So this has some real definition to it. And it has 12 gates, which means people can come and go, right? Remember, Jerusalem is not heaven, it is the capital of heaven, right? So you could be able to, heaven is bigger than Jerusalem. So you can go in and out, 12 gates as you come and go. There's 12 angels. Remember, angels are servants. They're there to assist you, to help, to serve you. And on the gates are the 12 tribes of Israel. And then we see that there's three on every direction, three in the north, three in the south, three on the east, three in the west. Once again, we've seen this before in Revelation. This is a calling back to Numbers chapter 2. When Israel had the tabernacle, they would set the tabernacle, and the 12 tribes would have to camp in a certain order that God gave them: three on the north, three on the south, three on the east, three on the west. So you can see a lot of Old Testament imagery here, right? And the wall of the city had 12 foundations, or 12 cornerstones, and on them were the 12 names of the 12 apostles. These are the 12 covenants of the New Testament, right? So we can see that heaven, excuse me, heaven here is surrounded by the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles. So we would say heaven is surrounded by all the saved, right? Half of them were saved in the Old Testament, the other half was saved in the New Testament. And so that's the picture that it is getting. The one who spoke with me had a measuring rod of gold. We've seen a measuring rod before, Revelations 11. Also, if you know your Old Testament well, Ezekiel chapter 40 has a vision of an angel giving measuring rods of the temple of gold to measure the city and its gates walk. The city lies four square, which means it's a square. Its length as same as its width, and he measured the city with the rod, and it is 12,000 stadia, or 1,380 miles. So it's 1,380 by 1,380 by 1,380. It is a cube. Okay, Jerusalem is a cube. And you say, man, that's really weird. Well, if you think about it, in the tabernacle, the Holy of Holies was 15 by 15 by 15. It was also a cube. And remember what we know about the Old Testament. God has told us many times that the tabernacle and the temple are just shadows of what is to come. It was an earthly way to understand what heaven is like. And so once you kind of have that mindset, it starts to make a little bit more sense. Its length and width and height are equal. It's a cube, and he measured its walls 144 cubits, which is about 72 yards. And we would say that's thickness, right? So it's the walls are thick. Um, and notice it says, we get a little note here from John, by human measurements. These are not some spiritual or angel measurements. He gave us the human measurements. And so these are for real measurements of a for real place that is already created, waiting for God to bring everything into motion. The wall was built of jasper, diamond, while the city was pure gold like clear glass. Now, we don't understand this too well because we don't have clear glass gold. But what you need to understand is in heaven, everything would be clear as to radiate God's glory. So wherever God is at, it is radiating, permeating all throughout heaven. And so there would be no shadows, there would be no stoppage of it, right? So even these 72 yard walls are thick. Um, they're still transparent, right? The glory of God can still permeate and go through them. The foundations of the wall of the city were adorned with every kind of jewel. It gives a list of jewels here. I don't have time to go into it, but many of them were on the high priest breastplate that he had to wear, just signifying the 12 tribes of Israel. And notice this. This is the most precarious verse, I think, of all of heaven. Okay. The 12 gates were 12 pearls, each of the gates made of a single pearl. And the street of the city was pure gold and transparent glass. Think about this. This pearl, okay, is almost 1,400 miles tall, 72 yards thick, one single pearl. That's a big honking pearl. A lot has been said about pearls, but to kind of sum up everything, everything is jewels and metal. But even in the old days, in these days, pearls were a high commodity. They were more precious than jewels and gold, because if you know anything, pearls are made by oysters, right? And so it's when an oyster gets an irritation or a piece of sand or it gets cut on the inside, it will start to do this. And so they're not abundant. They cannot be made. They cannot be um, fired and put more together to make a bigger piece. And so whatever you find is there. So they were more precious. Now, I have heard said, I'm not saying that I believe this, but it's a good way to think of this. Of all of heaven, it's jewels and metals, which we find all throughout throughout the scriptures. But why are the gates pearls? I've heard it said, maybe it's just a good preaching point. I don't know, but it's interesting. Um, of all of heaven, the ways into heaven, the gates, are made of a pearl. A pearl was made by an oyster, which is living, who has been hurt, who has been damaged, and has been irritated. And through that process, the oyster survives that damage and overcomes that damage and creates something glorious out of that. It's interesting that the gates of heaven are made by something that was living, like Jesus Christ, who was hurt, damaged, sacrificed, killed, but overcame that to create passage um, to God, to create something that was priceless, that could only be done by that oyster. Just a peculiar idea. I think that's one of those things that we'll ask God when we get to heaven and see if that's right. But that's an interesting thought, right? Verse 22, I saw no temple in the city. Once again, there is no temple in heaven. God is the temple, for its temple is the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb. And the city has no need of sun or moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives light, and the lamp is the Lamb. Notice that. So there's no stars, there's no heaven. There is no sun or moon. God gives all of the light. By its light will the nations walk, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. Um, the kings, this is just language of saying all people. There will be no hierarchy in heaven. So the kings will bow down just as the lowest of the low, right? So everybody, heaven was made up of all people, and they will all bow down. They will all be equal, and its gates will never be shut by day. This is interesting because in ancient times, gates were shut only at night or in war. But here, the gates of heaven never need to be shut because there is no night. There is no enemies in heaven. There is no bad guy coming to steal, to kill, or destroy because Satan has been locked up. And so there's no need for the gates to be closed because it is good all the time, right? So, a little side note. So, there's just big, huge pearls next to the wall. It's weird. I can't, of all of this, of all of Revelation, the pearls is what throws me for a loop. I just got to say that. There will be no night there, right? Because God's glory will be 24/7, 365, right? It'll be forever. They will bring into it the glory, the honor of the nation. Um, Meaning they will lay their crowns, right? People bring nothing to heaven. The only glory that is in heaven, is God, right? But nothing unclean will ever enter it, nor anyone who is detestable or false. This is a great verse to know. And somebody says, well, I think I'm pretty good. I don't think I need Jesus to get into heaven. And you say, well, have you done anything that's bad? Oh, yeah, I have. Well, no, nobody will enter heaven that's detestable or false. If you've done one false thing, you can't get into heaven. It is only through the perfect life of Jesus Christ. But only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. And that is the book that records every saved person's name who believes in Jesus Christ. It's a long chapter. But it gives us a little bit more description on heaven. And maybe you'll figure out the pearl thing one day and you can explain it to me, right? We got one more chapter. Can you believe that? One more chapter, and we have read through the New Testament together. I'm so excited for tomorrow as we jump into Revelation chapter 22, and we'll see you then. God bless.